Wyoming Territory, October 1879. The wind howled across the high plains as the sun slipped behind the granite teeth of the Bighorn Mountains. The girl came walking out of the dusk like a ghost, dust-caked boots, torn hem, blood on her sleeve and mud on her face. She stopped at the edge of the ranch yard, shoulders squared, chin lifted like she had just enough pride left to keep from falling to her knees. Peter Kincaid was hauling water from the well when he saw her. He set the bucket down and wiped his hands on his shirt, eyes narrowing. "Evening," he said, not moving closer. The girl looked like she might bolt. Her voice cracked when she spoke. "I need help." Peter stepped forward. "That your blood?" She shook her head. "No, not mine." He looked past her. No wagon, no horse, no saddlebag, just her. "What's your name?" "Etta," she said. "Etta Bryce." She was maybe 20, maybe a little more. Her coat hung off her like it had belonged to someone twice her size. Her hands were scraped raw. Peter motioned toward the porch. "Come on, sit." Etta hesitated. Then she stepped forward like her legs might give out. She didn't speak again until she was sitting on the top step, elbows on her knees. "I walked for 2 days," she said. "I had nowhere else to go." Peter crouched beside her, not touching her, voice quiet. "Well," he said, "then stay here as long as you need." Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. That first night she ate everything he said in front of her and said almost nothing. She sat by the stove in the corner of the kitchen, staring at the fire like it might tell her what to do next. Peter gave her the spare room. "Door locks from the inside," he said, "just so you know." Etta nodded. He heard her cry once, muffled through the walls, but she didn't ask for help and he didn't knock. By morning, the swelling along her cheekbone was clearer, bruises blooming dark and wide. Peter did not ask who had done it. He just poured her coffee and slid a plate of eggs across the table. "I've got fence to check," he said. "You can rest." "I'll come," she said. "Not a job for someone still healing." "I am not broken," she said. Peter held her gaze. After a long moment, he nodded. They rode out together. She borrowed an old hat that shadowed her face and a coat that still smelled faintly of Peter's soap. "Where are you from?" he asked as they rode along the fence line. "South of Cheyenne," she said. "My father died last winter. Mama not long after." "You got family?" "None that would want me." The words were flat, final. Peter did not press. By the third day she began to smile. Small things made it happen, the way his old dog, Rufus, refused to leave her side, or the way Peter swore under his breath when the fence pulled loose from the post again. "You talk to your cattle like they are people," she said one afternoon. Peter shrugged. "They listen better than most men." That evening, while she helped him bring in wood, she asked, "Why are you out here alone?" Peter paused, straightened. "Was married. She died 5 years ago." Etta's eyes softened. "I am sorry," he nodded. "I was too." For a long time, Etta did not ask more. That night she stood in the doorway of the barn while he brushed down the horses. The wind had died. The moon hung low and yellow over the pasture. "I never meant to end up here," she said. Peter set the brush aside. "Nobody ever really means to end up anywhere." "I was supposed to marry a man named Calvin," she said. "Mama thought it would keep me safe. She was wrong." Peter waited. "He locked me in the cellar when I said I would not bed him," she whispered. "Told the neighbors I'd gone east. I climbed out through the coal chute the night he passed out drunk." Peter's jaw tightened. "I thought maybe I could reach Laramie." She looked down. "But I was not even sure which way was west anymore. You do not have to be afraid now." She looked up and her voice broke. "I have nowhere else." Peter stepped closer, not touching her, just close enough that she could feel the steadiness in him. "Then stay here," he said, quiet but sure. "As long as you need." Etta's breath caught. "Do you mean that?" she asked. "I do." Peter's voice was warm, steady. "You are safe here." That night she sat beside him on the porch after supper. The stars were thick above them. "I can help," she said, "with the horses, with cooking if you like. You do not owe me anything, Etta." "I know," she said, "but I want to." He looked over at her. Her hair hung loose, catching the starlight. Her face had softened, though the bruises still lingered. He smiled. "Then I would be glad for the help." She smiled back. And for the first time in a long time, Peter Kincaid felt something shift in his chest, something warm, something new. Etta leaned her shoulder just barely against his. He did not move away. They sat like that until the cold sent them inside, and neither of them felt quite so alone anymore. The first snow came early that year, brushing the prairie in a thin, uncertain veil. It melted by midday, but the ground held the cold. Etta stood at the edge of the pasture with a pitchfork in hand, watching the breath of the cattle rise like smoke in the crisp air. Her sleeves were rolled, cheeks flushed from work. She wore one of Peter's old scarves tucked into her collar, the wool scratchy but warm. Peter came up from the root cellar carrying a sack of potatoes. "They'll eat better than us this winter, those cows," he said, nodding toward the herd. Etta leaned on the pitchfork. "They stare like they expect me to apologize for the cold. Wouldn't be the first time you've tried reasoning with livestock." She gave a soft laugh, the kind that stayed close to her throat. "Better company than most folks I've known." Peter set the sack against the porch rail, brushing off his hands. "They don't ask for much, just food and fence." Etta's gaze drifted toward the ridgeline. "Fence is holding better. That southern post hasn't sagged since you reset it. You helped dig it in." He stepped closer, the morning light catching the green flecks in his eyes. "You've got a good hand. I hope you know that." Etta's mouth parted like she wanted to say something, but instead she looked down and dug the pitchfork into the hay pile. "Never thought I'd be any use on a ranch. You thought wrong." She worked in silence for a moment, then asked, "Did you ever think about leaving this place?" Peter leaned his hip against the rail. "I did. Right after she passed. Thought maybe I'd go to Oregon. Start again near the coast. But you stayed. This land was hers too, felt wrong to leave it behind." Etta glanced at him. "You still think of her. Some days more than others." He didn't flinch from the truth. "But the ache's not sharp like it was." She nodded, thoughtful. "I never got to bury Mama proper. The ground was too hard when she passed. I said words, but they just froze in the air." Peter didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was low. "We can build her a marker, doesn't matter how far the body lies. The memory still needs a place to rest." Etta swallowed. That'd mean a great deal. They spent the afternoon hauling wood from the stand of cottonwoods by the creek. The horses pulled the sled slow through the thin frost, hooves crunching over frozen roots. Etta worked without complaint, her gloves worn at the fingertips. Peter offered her his spare pair without a word. At supper, they sat across the table in quiet comfort. The fire cracked in the stove, casting long shadows across the pine walls. Etta reached for the salt with her left hand, revealing a pale scar running from wrist to knuckle. Peter glanced at it, then back to his stew. "That from before you left," she hesitated. "A broken plate." Calvin didn't like shouted answers. Peter's jaw set, but his voice stayed even. "You don't have to explain." "I want to." She met his eyes. "I came here because I was running, but now—" She trailed off. He didn't push her to finish. Later, Etta brought a blanket out to the porch and sat on the top step. Peter joined her with 2 tin cups of tea, the steam curling between them. "Did you ever think you'd live out here alone this long?" she asked. "I thought I'd get used to it." He passed her a cup. "But some days still feel too quiet." Etta sipped, then looked out over the pasture. "It's not so quiet anymore." He glanced at her. "No, it's not." The wind tugged at her hair. She didn't pull it back. "I don't know what I'm becoming here," she said. "But it feels better than what I was." Peter didn't smile, but something in him settled. "You're becoming yourself again." She looked at him then, really looked. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." She held his gaze. "Then let me stay, not just for shelter, let me belong." Peter set his cup down beside his boot. "You already do." Etta's shoulders eased, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she leaned fully against his side. He wrapped his arm around her without hesitation. The night deepened, but neither of them moved. Inside, the fire burned low. Outside, the stars turned quiet in the sky. And Etta Bryce began to believe that peace might not be a thing lost forever. The first real snow held through the night. By dawn, the yard lay hushed under a pale blanket, the corral posts capped white, the sky the color of pewter. Etta stood in the kitchen doorway with her hands wrapped around a tin mug, watching Peter shovel a path from the barn. His coat was dark with melt, steam rising from his shoulders where sweat met cold. He worked slow and steady, the way he did everything, as if he'd long since made peace with the weight of winter. She stepped out onto the porch, boots crunching over the fresh crust. "You always clear it yourself." Peter paused, leaning on the handle. "Don't trust the mule to do it straight." Etta smiled faintly, then looked out over the slope where the creek curved under cottonwoods gone bare. "We could bring in the rest of that split wood today, before it ices over." He gave a thoughtful nod. "You up for it?" "I'm not made of glass." Peter didn't answer right away. His eyes rested on her face, then moved away. "I never thought you were." They worked until their gloves stiffened, until the sun broke through just enough to make the snow glitter like crushed quartz. Etta's shoulders ached, but it was the kind of ache that settled deep and left her breath rising in satisfaction. As they finished stacking the last armfuls by the wall, she let herself ask, "What was she like, your wife?" Peter's hand stilled on the wood. He didn't look at her. "She was kind," he said finally. "Not soft, but kind. She never had to raise her voice to be known." Etta nodded. "Sounds like someone worth remembering." "She was." His voice dipped low, almost lost in the sound of the wind through the eaves. "But she's gone. And I've learned how to let her rest." They didn't speak for a while after that. Not until the kettle whistled inside and Peter moved to take it off the stove. That evening, Etta sat at the table mending a tear in one of his work shirts. Her stitches were uneven, but they held. Peter came in from the barn, smelling of hay and smoke, and hung his coat by the door. "You didn't have to do that," he said, nodding at the shirt. She bit off the thread with her teeth. "I wanted to." He moved closer, took the shirt from her hands and traced the seam with his thumb. "You've got a steadier touch than you think." Etta stood, brushing lint from her skirt. "I used to sew for my father, taught myself on scraps." Peter folded the shirt and placed it on the shelf. "You've done more than patch things, Etta. You've changed the feel of this place." She looked up at him, eyes steady. "So have you." The fire burned low. Outside, snow slid from the roof in slow sheets. She took a step toward him, close enough to see the fine weather lines at the corners of his eyes. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, voice quiet but sure. Peter's hand reached up, calloused fingers brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "I'd never ask you to forget, only to know you're safe." "I do," she said. "I know." He didn't kiss her then, not yet. But he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth in him, the grounding presence that had become her anchor. Later, as she lay beneath the quilt in the small room that was no longer spare, she listened to the wind rise again. It pressed against the walls like a living thing, but it didn't reach her. Not truly. The past hadn't vanished. But it no longer ruled her. And in the quiet, she let herself believe that maybe this place, this man, could be the beginning of something she'd never thought to ask for. By late November, the light shifted. Days ended sooner, and the frost in the mornings came thick enough to rim the pump handle in white. Etta had taken to waking before the sun, starting the fire and stepping out to greet the quiet with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. The silence had become a companion, no longer the kind that pressed down on her, but the kind that let her breathe. Peter found her that morning near the corral, her hands wrapped around a tin of ashes as she scattered them into the snow. He didn't ask what they were for. "Stove's drawing better," she said without turning. "Good," he answered, rubbing a thumb over the back of his neck. "I've been meaning to fix the flue, but it'll hold till spring." Etta looked at him, her face unreadable. "You always say that. Things can wait till spring." "But not everything can." Peter nodded slowly, snow crunching beneath his heel as he shifted his stance. "What's on your mind?" She set the tin aside and brushed ash from her fingers. "I didn't come here thinking I'd stay. I didn't come here thinking much at all. But I've been thinking lately." Peter waited. "I want to build something," she said. "Not just pass through, not just help you with barn chores and patch shirts. I want to dig roots." Peter studied her. "You already have." "Not yet. I've been living in your world, Peter." "I want to make it mine too," his brow furrowed. "It is yours, more than you know." She stepped closer, boots leaving clean impressions in the drift. "Then let me prove it. Let me plant something come thaw. Let me keep hens. Let me trade butter in town. Let me be more than a guest." Peter's mouth tugged into a quiet, thoughtful shape. "You've never been a guest here." "I need to do it with both hands. My name on the fence. My work in the ground." He nodded once. "Then we'll build it together." She exhaled, a sound of relief and resolve tangled as one. "Then I'll start with the coop." Peter's smile was faint, but it reached his eyes. "Best bring nails." The old ones half leaning on Faith. They spent that afternoon in the loft, sorting through the lumber he'd stored across winters. Etta measured boards with a length of twine, while Peter sharpened the blade on a hand saw. The air smelled of dust and dry hay, and neither of them spoke much. They didn't need to. Only once did Etta pause, running her palm along a plank, the grain catching under her fingertips. "My father built our porch with pine like this," she said. "He let me drive the last nail, told me it'd hold the whole house up." Peter looked over from the workbench. "Did it? Until it didn't." She folded the memory away with a small nod. "But I liked believing it would." They worked until the light thinned, and Peter carried the boards down himself, insisting the ladder was too slick for two. Etta waited with a lantern, its glow soft against her face. That evening, after supper, she brought out a small bundle wrapped in cloth and placed it on the table. Inside was a folded shirt, worn thin at the collar. "I found this in my bag," she said. "It was Pa's. I've kept it through every move, every place I didn't stay long." Peter looked at her hands, how carefully she held the fabric. "I want to use the cloth to line the nesting boxes," she said. "So something of him stays useful." Peter didn't speak right away. When he did, his voice was low. "He'd be proud of the way you've stood back up." She didn't answer, only reached across the table and laid her hand on his. Her touch was light, but it stayed. Outside, the wind had calmed and the chimney smoke curled straight in the air. The house no longer felt like shelter alone, it felt like promise. Etta didn't go to her room that night. She stood by the fire until Peter banked it low, then followed him to the door of his room. He turned, surprised, but said nothing. She looked up at him. "I'm not asking for anything I haven't already earned." Peter's gaze held hers. "Then come in." They crossed that threshold together. No rush, no fire, just two people who had weathered enough cold to know how to keep warmth alive. And that night, beneath the roof they both tended, the past no longer chased them. It had shaped them. But it didn't own them. By morning, the snow outside lay untouched, but inside a life had begun to take root. By mid-January, the coop stood finished, its roof pitched against the wind, its walls tight with care. Etta had lined the nesting boxes with scraps of old muslin and pine shavings. Each morning she stepped out bundled in Peter's spare coat, lantern swinging at her side, boots leaving tidy prints in the snow. The hens had come from a neighbor down the slope, traded for a sack of dried beans and a few jars of pickled beets she'd preserved without asking. Peter had looked at the jars, then at her, and said nothing but, "They'll lay better come spring." They took their meals at the table now, always together, always in quiet companionship that had grown into something sturdy. He had carved a small shelf for her recipe book. She mended the seat of his trousers without him asking. In the evenings, they read aloud by lamplight, Etta stumbling at times over unfamiliar words, Peter patient in his corrections. One morning, Etta returned from the coop with her hands tucked beneath her shawl. "Guess what I found," she said, eyes bright with something more than the cold. She opened her fingers to reveal a single brown egg still warm. Peter's brows lifted. "That's early. She must feel safe." He stepped closer and cupped her hands between his. "So do I." That night, they lay facing each other, the space between them no longer cautious. Etta traced her fingers along the line of his jaw where a faint scar curved under the rough stubble. "How'd you get this?" she whispered. "Hung a lantern too low in the barn." "Walked straight into it." He gave a low chuckle. "Felt like a fool. You were alone then." "I was." She leaned forward and kissed the place where the scar turned. "You're not anymore." The next morning brought a letter from town, knotted in twine and carried by a neighbor passing through. Peter unfolded it at the kitchen table, his eyes scanning the page, then slowing. Etta laid a hand on his arm. "What is it?" "My brother's widow, Clara. She's moving back from Missouri with the children, needs a place to stop for the spring thaw." He folded the letter again. "She'll be here in March if the river crossings hold." Etta nodded once. "We'll make room." Peter watched her. "You don't have to say yes. They're your kin. That makes them mine." He reached across the table, took her hand, and held it there a moment longer than usual. "You've got a generous heart. I've just learned what it feels like to be taken in when the road's gone dark." They cleared out the storage room beside the kitchen, moved the barrels and crates into the loft. Peter repaired the old trundle bed, and Etta stitched new ticking for the mattress. She embroidered the corner of the pillow with a single clover, something her mother had taught her long ago. In February, the snow turned to sleet. The pasture iced over, and the horses had to be moved to the lower shelter. Etta walked carefully along the paths, steadying herself with a cane Peter had carved from a twisted cedar branch. She didn't ask for it, but he left it leaning against the porch rail one day, and she used it without a word. They didn't speak often of what had passed before they met what had broken them, what they had buried, but some nights, when the wind rose and the lantern hissed low, Etta would reach for him in the dark, and he would hold her until her breathing softened. "I used to think love was a thing that came all at once," she said one of those nights. Peter's voice was almost lost in the hush. "It doesn't, no," she said. "It grows like fence posts in frost-thawed ground, one at a time." He kissed her shoulder. "Then we'll keep setting them together." The thaw came slow but sure, and the road rutted with melt. In March, Clara arrived with 4 children, a wagon loaded with quilts and dried apples, and a mule that looked like it had seen better decades. Peter lifted the youngest from the seat, a boy no older than 5, and Etta stepped forward with a pot of broth already simmering inside. That night, the house was full of voices and small feet thudding on floorboards. Etta tucked the children into their beds with stories of hens that laid gold and barns that sang at night. Peter watched from the doorway, arms crossed, eyes soft with something deeper than pride. After the children were asleep, Clara sat by the fire and looked at them both. "I wasn't sure what I'd find here." Peter poured her a cup of cider. "You found home." Clara glanced toward Etta. "Looks like you already had one." Etta met her gaze. "It took time." But yes. When the thaw completed and Clara moved on with the promise of letters and summer visits, the house felt quiet again but not empty. In the weeks that followed, Etta planted her first rows of cabbage and onion. Peter built a new gate for the garden. They argued once, sharp and honest, about where the smokehouse should go. Then made up in laughter and mud, and spent the evening wiping soot from each other's cheeks. One warm April morning, Peter stood near the porch steps with something hidden behind his back. Etta came up from the creek carrying a basket of laundry, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. He stepped in front of her, eyes steady. "I have something for you." She raised a brow. "Already gave me your best coat and your last jar of honey. This is different." He brought the object forward, a plain band of silver, old, etched with tiny pines. She stared at it a long moment. "Where did you find that?" "It was my mother's. Pa gave it to her when they settled in Dakota Territory. She wore it until she passed. I kept it in a tin under the floorboards." Etta's voice went quiet. "Why now?" Peter held the ring out. "Because you've made this place into more than land and walls. You've made it a life. And I want to build every bit of it with you." She didn't cry. She only took the ring and slid it on her finger where it fit like it had been waiting. "You already knew my answer," she said. "I still wanted to ask." That night they stood under the stars with the mountains dark against the sky. No preacher. No papers. Just two hands joined, two hearts steady, and when the night deepened they went inside and closed the door behind them, a door that now belonged to them both. Years passed. The coop grew crowded and the garden doubled. Rufus, the old dog, passed one summer under the apple tree, and Peter carved a small marker from aspen. The children came to visit each harvest, bringing laughter and chaos and shoes left in the hall. Etta taught them how to gather eggs without getting pecked. Peter taught them how to mend a gate with 3 nails and a bit of patience. They never left the land. Never needed to. And when the wind rose each winter and the fire hissed low, they still sat beside each other, hands laced, hearts sure. The past had shaped them, but love had steadied them. And in that quiet corner of Wyoming Territory, where the snow fell clean and the fence posts held, Etta and Peter lived the rest of their days in a peace that neither had dared to name until it finally came true.